Welcome to another virtual edition of Texas Public Radio's Storyteller Series. I'm Andrea Vocab Sanderson, and this is Worth Repeating. Tonight's episode features a selection of stories from your friends and neighbors in San Antonio about big conversations and the weight of words. Sit down, settle in. It's time for The Talk. Lindsay Nade wanted to travel the world after college. She knew her family, especially her mom, wasn't ready to let her go, and that sooner or later she would have to break the news that she was leaving the nest.
There's a story about me that my mom loves to tell. When I was about 3 or 4, I was throwing a tantrum, and she got eye level with me and said, "Lindsay, I'm the mama. I'm always going to win. Now go to your room. Do not stomp up the stairs. Do not slam your door, and I don't want to hear you crying." So me, being the child that I was, stomped up the stairs, slammed the door, opened the door, and cried as loudly as I could. My mother went to the kitchen to do the dishes in front of the windows so that if the neighbors heard me, they would know that all of this crying and carrying on was my own accord. After a while, I came downstairs, got quiet, and went to where my mother was at the sink. And I said, "Mom," and she said yes, thinking I was going to apologize or to say something sweet. And I said, "I may not always win, but I'm always going to keep trying." At this point, my mother would laugh and say, "That's a great attitude to have with the world, but not with your mom." Now, as an adult, that stubbornness and the determination to do things my own way has manifested itself in some decisions that my family wasn't exactly thrilled about. In July 2015, I moved back to my hometown after 3.5 years of teaching English to elementary students in South Korea. Now, my family was happy, thrilled to have me back. I had been gone a very long time. I had missed birthdays. I had missed family events, holidays. I missed years of my nieces and nephews growing up, and my family was happy to have me back. I also was happy to be back and be around my family, but it was more complicated than that for me. I didn't know what I was doing. I felt pretty lost. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a car. I was back in my childhood home. People I grew up with all had marriages and careers and kids, and I just felt really lost. So I went introspective. What is it that I want? What is it I want to do? What's next? And I realized that I wanted to help people, and I wasn't done traveling yet. So even though I knew my family probably wouldn't be happy, I went ahead and broadened my job search to include international opportunities. Now, I have this habit of always trying to say yes more often than I say no. And it's gotten me in some pretty cool adventures. And in the spirit of that, I came across an opportunity that I applied for, working for an organization that embraces holistic education with individuals living in refugee camps located in the Middle East, specifically in occupied Palestinian territory. I applied, and after the first interview, I thought, they're going to offer me this job. And then I had a second interview, and I thought, well, that went really well. They're going to offer me this job. I have no idea what I'm going to do. And then, sure enough, they offered me the job. Now, November 2015 is an important time to talk about. There was violence kicking off in the Holy Land. It was common on the nightly news that we would watch after my parents got home from work to see military tanks rolling through the streets of Bethlehem, and seeing Palestinian men and young boys with rocks facing off against a military with automatic weapons. And I knew that me going abroad again was going to be an issue. But the fact that I was going to occupy Palestinian territory put a whole nother level of fear into that situation. One evening, I noticed my mother doing dishes at the sink, and so I went and stood next to her, and I told her about this opportunity that I had. to go for 3 months as a consultant to see if I was a fit for them and if they were a fit for me. And if things went well, I would have a 1-year contract. And then I told her the location. She stopped doing dishes. She dried her hands, and she left the room without a word. I mean, what did I expect? What did I want her to say? I wanted her to say that she was proud of me. I wanted her to say that I was doing really good work, important work that was making a difference, that I wasn't allowing fear to rule my decisions, that she understood why it was important to me, for me to go. I felt really disappointed, and I felt disappointing. I felt like I was misunderstood and like that I was somehow letting my parents down. I wanted my mom to be proud, and I don't know that that's what she was. We didn't talk for a few days, which is tricky when you live together. And after a couple of weeks of watching the news but not saying anything and decorating the house for Christmas, fully knowing that I would not be there to celebrate, I left and I moved to the Middle East, where I spent the first of 3 Christmas seasons in the Holy Land. Now, transition to a new job is always a bit rocky, but I also had to learn the culture. I had to learn how to navigate language. I had to do all this very quickly, with the addition of thinking about safety, and how to navigate military occupied space, not just for me, but for the interns that I was responsible for. Now, I do want to make it clear, like, my parents' fears were not unfounded. There was a lot of violence happening in the area, but it was never directed at me. And one of the things I talked to my interns about is that the fact that I had an American passport and the fact that I look like I do would often make people safer if I was there, because the military wouldn't want to kick anything off. I didn't put much on social media about my life during that time, due to the sensitive nature of the work I was doing. And I also found myself censoring myself for our conversations with my family. Not because I didn't want them to know what was happening, but because I didn't want to instill more fear in them that I couldn't do anything about. The result of this is that there's a 2.5-year time of my life that my family knows very little about what I was doing or what happened. And that makes me sad. So after 3 contracts and 2.5 years, I moved back stateside, and this time got a job. I moved to San Antonio to accept the position that I currently have. And even though it is 15 hours away from my family, it's on the same side of the ocean. So I think we're all pretty happy about that. You know, building connections when you're so far apart is really hard. My mom's method of doing that was to send me care packages. In Korea, those were my favorite snacks or little gifts for my students and photos. In Palestine, I didn't have any mail service, so that wasn't an option. But since I've been in San Antonio, my mother has picked up this habit again. And of all the care packages she sends, my favorite ones have to be the ones with the crossword puzzles in them. The summer between my time in Korea and the time I went abroad again, my grandmother, my mother, and I developed a routine. My grandmother would look at articles and magazines. My mother would do the Sudoku, and I would do the crossword puzzle. Well, now my mother saves the crossword puzzles, staples the answer key to the back of it, fills an envelope, and then sends it to me. Every time I laugh, I cry. It's just an envelope full of love. I keep them all in a green folder next to my bed, because even as an adult, it's comforting to know that my mother's love is nearby. You know, I think that sometimes the biggest messages don't require spoken word at all.
The truth can hurt, but sometimes sharing the secret is the first step on the path toward healing. After breaking her silence, Hannah Tar harnessed the power of her words to speak up for herself and speak out for other survivors.
It felt like hundreds of angry bees were swarming underneath my skin all the time. I was so angry. I was so irritated. I was constantly snapping at my friends and my family, and that's not like me at all. You know, I would spend hours on the phone with my mom every single day. I'd call home. My friends, I was living in Chicago at the time by myself. I'd been out there for about 7 or 8 years by this point, and my friends out there became my family. And I was so mean to them. I just wanted to fight all the time. I was so angry. So this one day, I'm in a cafe and I'm doing homework, which was already overwhelming and stressful because I was failing 3 of my classes, which is very unlike me because I'm on academic scholarship and school is everything to me. I'm going to nursing school to be a nurse practitioner in forensic nursing. And my mom calls me, and I can feel those bees swarming inside, and I pick up. What? She's like, I'm just checking in. I can tell something's off. Nope, I'm fine. Leave me alone. I'm fine. She goes, Hannah, please talk to me. I can tell something's wrong. No, Mom, I'm fine. Click. Now the bees are really angry, and my skin feels like it's on fire, but my blood is now made of ice, and I can feel every single thing touching my body. I can feel the air around my ears. I was incredibly anxious. This huge wave of energy and anxiety and panic sets in, and the only person that I want to call to make it go away is my mom. So I call her, and before she can even say anything, my eyes are already welling up with tears, and the bees are stuck in my throat. And I said, Mom, I need help. And that was the day that I revealed to my mom, my 3 siblings, and my father that a month prior, I had been sexually assaulted and almost murdered by a rideshare driver. And, with my mom, I didn't mean to. I didn't like plan this out. It wasn't that I wasn't going to tell them, because I knew that I had to eventually. I just hadn't yet had the conversation with myself of what happened. I hadn't come to terms with it really, of saying like, yeah, you survived that. That's like a new level of like things that we were aware that humans could do. I mean, that humans can do awful things from like what the news and what we watch on Law and Order and stuff like that, but it's different when you are, I was going to say in the driver's seat, but I wasn't. I was in the passenger seat. Terrible joke. Sorry. But yeah, it's different when it's happening to you. So when I just hadn't had that conversation of, Hannah, you were violently assaulted and almost murdered by this person. So when I told my mom, she was the first person I told besides my friends in Chicago. But when I told my mom, it was like a tell-all, which wasn't purposeful. Everything just happened. Everything just came out. And she knew every detail. I told her everything. And I could tell that she was most upset that because she's my mother and because I'm 3,000 miles away in Chicago, that she couldn't protect me. I could tell that part hurt her the most. I told her about my amazing detectives and investigators that were on my team that were doing an incredible job, and I could tell that helped ease her anxiety. But from the jump, she was on board. Whatever I needed, she was there. So I hung up with her and called my big sister, who's my person. This woman is my person. And She knew about the time, unfortunately this isn't the first time that something like this had happened to me. So she knew about a time that happened while I was in college 10 years prior. And then she also knew about a year before this incident, another rideshare driver had attacked me. So I told her very delicately and very cautiously, but I told her the way that you would a best friend. But I just took very gentle care of her while telling her. And I could tell that she was also very upset, but like didn't know what to say yet. She hadn't digested it yet. And then with my little sister, I made it a teaching moment by saying, hey, this happened. Unfortunately, it happens a lot. And unfortunately, the people that we perceive as most cautious, or not cautious, most safe, like these are safe people, rideshare is a safe solution to, not driving drunk or not, it's a safe solution. You know what I'm saying? But unfortunately, it sometimes is primed to be the most predatory. So just be cautious, be careful. And with my brother, I wasn't very close with him, not for anything bad. We just have never really connected, pretty deeply. But I told him pretty awkwardly and apologetically, and I could tell that he didn't really know what to say, but he was sorry. And my dad, him and I have a very tumultuous relationship. But the way that I told him was just that everything's fine, I'm handling it, it's all good, we're good. Which could not have been further from the truth. But you know what I noticed though is they all knew that something was wrong. And then once I told them, as awful as the news was, they were grateful that I told them. And I was grateful to tell them because those bees, I keep going back to this metaphor of bees, but that's really how it felt. Those bees underneath my skin are now being transferred. So they took over some bees. And anyone can take care of 2 bees, So mom takes 2 bees, each one of my siblings takes 2 bees, my dad takes 2 bees. But then I was contacted by Marie Claire magazine, and me and 23 other survivors of rideshare assaults told our story. And that took away a lot of bees. And it was published in the May 2020 issue of Marie Claire, I always say it wrong. And then I did a solo show in Chicago, and that took away a bunch of bees. We sold out 2 weekends in a row. My best friend directed it, and I produced it and wrote it, and it was awesome. Every person I connect with on these unfortunate circumstances, it just helps me and the other person realize that you're not alone, unfortunately. And I just hope that they find strength and solace in speaking to friends, to family, to police, to therapy. Oh my God, I love therapy. To therapists. And so if you're listening and this is happening to you, I hope this helps. And if you're just a listener, well, thanks for taking some bees off my hands.
As a child, Rosemary Livar was taught that God loved her, that he was always there for her. So why couldn't she see him? When doubts crept in, young Rosemary decided to do the most logical thing she could think of: ask him herself.
It was a beautiful spring day in San Antonio. The wide blue Texas sky was cloudless, except for the thin white streaks left high in the sky from the jets flying in and out of Lackland Air Force Base. I was 6 and at home because my birthday's in October and we missed the September cutoff date for first graders in the fall. We lived on a double lot that my grandma Lupe owned off of 36th Street on the west side. Mama did laundry outside behind the house. The little room, or cuartito, was attached to the back of the house, but that's where the washing machine lived. It smiled with its mean-looking rollers, ready to eat fingers, hands, and arms if you weren't careful. Ooh. The double tinas held the rinse water, one for clear and one for water with Clorox, and it sat right outside the opening. As Mama did the wash, I busied myself picking wildflowers and looking for horny toads. I sat on the dusty ground, close to a small hole. I watched in amazement at large red ants as they entered and exited their underground homes. I sure love to watch them and imagine what all of that looked like. I sure wish I could speak hormiga so I could ask them, do you ever get a chance to play? Or is it always just work, work, work? As I began to ponder on the nature of things, the flowers and animals, the sky and grown-ups and me, my thoughts turned to God. I mean, who are you really? What are you made of? Where are you? Everywhere. Okay, then why can't I see you? Ever since I could remember, I had conversations with God. When I was 5, I was so proud of the fact that I learned all of the Our Father. Then I learned the lyrics to my favorite song, Ray Charles' I Can't Stop Loving You. I thank God for helping me with both those things, but now somehow doubt began to creep in. I mean, I still believed in Santa, of course, because, well, I saw him every year in the department stores. And anyways, where'd all those toys come from? I mean, my parents spent all year telling us how we couldn't afford things. So all these toys had to come from someone. And the tooth fairy, now I know she's real. I mean, like my dad would give us money. Psh, you don't know my dad. And the Easter bunny? Well, he actually appeared to me once as a puka, but that's another story. But good old God, huh? I felt the warm air blow through my long, scraggly hair that I kept out of my face with a white plastic hairband. I imagined the ants saying their excuse me's as they passed politely by each other, carrying crumbs and junk. But back to God, huh? Maybe. Do I even think it? I began to argue with myself. Maybe. Don't. There's even. Oh, God. Think it. Oh, I thought it. I sucked in my breath immediately and I looked up to the sky. But nothing happened. I thought it felt a bit bolder now. All right, I'll say it. You know what? Maybe you're not real, God. Maybe I've just been talking to myself all this time. Maybe God's just something that grown-ups made up to scare little kids into doing good stuff and to just make us behave. I began to feel duped, angry even at the thought. I watched my mom across the yard. She was hanging bright white sheets, socks, and whitey-tighty calzones on the line. Then she would prop up the sagging lines full of clothes with a long pole that had a bent nail at the end, like a hook, that would catch the line and elevate it. And that made our clothes look like they were standing at full sail. You know, in cartoons and TV shows, they always use the same gag. Someone would say, "May God strike me down if I'm lying." And then boom, they'd be burnt toast. I mean, was it a lie? Or did they say it so often because maybe sometimes it really happens? I began to cry. Half of me felt like I was betraying a friend, and the other half felt like that friend was betraying me. Was I ready to die for my beliefs or lack thereof? I think so. Sure. I looked over at Mama again, thinking in my heart, this may be the last time I see her. But I just had to know. I really started crying then. I felt all sweaty and shaky and scared. I decided that I really needed to get God's attention. So I thought of the worst thing I could do. But do I dare? I turned away from Ma and I made a fist. My little brown hand was trembling. And then I brought it out. My middle finger. Well, If God's not real, nothing will happen to me, right? And if God is real and I get struck down, well, heaven's supposed to be a pretty nice place, ain't it? Goodbye, flowers, sky and wind. Adios, hormigas. Goodbye, Mommy. I love you. And what felt like my last ounce of strength, I raised that middle finger straight up skyward in a dare. Here I am. Answer me! I screamed. I fully expected to hear a loud clap of thunder, and I fully expected to be struck down by a bright hot bolt of lightning that would have left this skinny little brown girl with long scraggly hair in the form of a little black smoldering piece of chicharron, of course with a piece of melted plastic left on my skull where my hairband had been. But nothing happened. Nothing. The day remained as it had been. A nice warm breeze continued to blow. The ants continued on their way. And my mama, beautiful as ever and hardworking, was now calling me in for lunch. I decided at the time that I still wasn't quite sure if God existed or not. But I knew that if he is real, he must really love me, because he was being an awfully nice guy for letting me throw the finger at him and not even getting mad at me. I wiped my tears and dusted myself off and headed inside for lunch. As I adjusted my hairband, I looked up towards heaven, towards the blue sky with the high white streaks, now looking as faint as I felt, as I sheepishly said, "Sorry, friend."
When you need to have hard conversations, sometimes it's easy to put your thoughts into writing. Other times, it's the only available option. After a messy breakup, Jocelyn Iglesias wasn't able to talk to her former partner's child, so she wrote the words down instead.
Grief is strange. It is wild and complex, and it has no bounds that I think we can even begin to start to imagine. When I talk about my son Leo, my grief is almost evident. I've been told by pretty much almost everybody that when I talk about him in a way that makes it sound as though he's passed, which in a way he has. I became Leo's mom about 2 years ago, so he was just a few months shy of turning 2. He was this beautiful, chubby little blonde child. He was so sweet and adventurous and fun. He's exactly what I needed at that point in my life. I used to joke with everybody that I met that I fell in love with him before I fell in love with his dad, which even now is still pretty true. His birth mother had, on her own accord, decided not to have any contact with him when she saw that he had already taken to me as mom. And then now as I start to reestablish and create this relationship with her, this friendship, she also had her own reasons that are valid. And so Leo's dad and I split about 2 months ago. He had gotten this very big, very exciting career opportunity for him to advance in Fort Worth. And at that time, we were living in East Texas. He decided that, our son would go on this first annual vacation that he had gone on pretty much all throughout his childhood, my ex-husband. And so I said, okay, he'll have fun, you can work, and we can get acclimated. And then our car broke down, and there was no feasible way for kind of all three of us to stay together. And so Leo went on his vacation a little bit earlier, and then the baby and I stayed down here in San Antonio with my parents. It only took probably about a week for my ex-husband to decide that being a family was no longer something he wanted, and we separated physically and romantically. And so now my son now lives in Oklahoma, probably about 10 hours away from us and 6 from his dad. And due to some concerns that I had brought up almost incessantly, his dad made the decision to cease all communication that I had with Leo, and so I've not spoken to him or seen him in about 2 months, coming up on 3. And that was one of the hardest things for me to probably ever work through. I remember being apathetic and I was depressed, and I felt like I was sinking every single day, just to know that I would no longer be mom to this, little boy who hung the stars and the moon in my sky. And so that was a very, very hard period. And as one does, I guess, I decided to watch Dr. Phil one day, and there was this episode on where he talks to a mom who had also recently lost her son in a very tragic and unexpected way. And he had told her to sit down in this chair and close her eyes and imagine that her son was right there in front of her. She could see him and touch him and remember the way that he smelled, just to have that one more moment of just being with him. And I remember that made such an impact that I decided to try it. And gosh, it worked. It's something that I still do to this day when I need, just that kind of little bit of companionship that I'm forever longing for with him again. I'll picture him in the front of my mind, and I'll see his beautiful chubby cheeks and his hands that are somehow always dirty and his little runny nose. And it feels like everything's okay again. Another thing that I took to doing was writing letters. As I mentioned before, he and I have no contact. And it was always my my responsibility to help everybody get to understand things, if that makes any sense. And so I had been kind of formulating these ideas of how I would tell him that Mama and Dad don't live together anymore. That started this almost form of communication with him, where I would write him letters and I would tell him, "Hey Bubs," which is my nickname for him, "it's Mama." And I would tell him that I miss him so much, that I love him more than I can put into words. And I would start to explain these very big concepts in, terms that he could understand as a 4-year-old. And in that, it had helped me work through and kind of try to understand myself, what we were going through. He is this very, very little boy, having to just deal with these very big, very adult problems. And I just remember needing to do something for him. And so I took to writing letters, and I still do. I have a stack of them saved, both on my computer and, physically, they're on my phone. And so every time he popped into my mind, just for that small second, that second where I can see him, and I can feel him, and I can smell him, and I can imagine the way his hair felt against my hand as he walked by me every morning. And that brings me just a little bit more peace.
Thanks for joining us for this virtual edition of Texas Public Radio's Worth Repeating, made possible by the 80/20 Foundation. Stay tuned for the next full episode of Stories About Happy Accidents. You can find more information about Worth Repeating and how to support Texas Public Radio at tpr.org.